Good morning. Welcome back to our weekly professional insights brought to you by the National Referral Network, where we talk to licensed professionals about real issues that are affecting your financial situation, your business, and kind of help show you how a coordinated financial plan brings clarity to your financial plan. And this morning, we have Rich Daniels, the founder and president of Intrepid Legal, a fractional general counsel and strategic advisory firm. It's a tongue twister. He helps companies with things like contract negotiation, drafting, intellectual property, and a host of other things. We're going to dig into that. But before we do, make sure to hit that subscribe and like button, hit that notification bell, leave any questions down below. His link is below, and we'll get to that at the end as well. So, Rich, good morning. How are you?
I'm fine, Mike. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So, in our initial conversation, Rich, one of the things that I didn't know is really what a general counsel does. So, in a traditional sense, what does a general counsel do for a company?
Well, general counsel does a variety of things. As I think I mentioned in our previous conversation, think of a traditional corporation, Fortune 500. They have a legal department, number of attorneys and paralegals who work for the company, and the head of that department is the general counsel. In some of the smaller, medium-sized companies, they can't afford a large staff. So they just have maybe one or two people, and the head of that legal issue, part of the C-suite, is the general counsel, who handles all general legal issues and counsels both the board, the leadership team, and also business people throughout the company on various legal matters.
Okay, so as a and this was the interesting thing when you and I spoke, because we've talked to fractional CFOs, we've talked to all the C-suite individuals are now fractionalized, right?
Correct.
So how does a traditional general counsel differ from what you do as a fractional general counsel?
The work itself is not any different. The structure is different, such that I'm working for a number of different companies as their general counsel at the same time. And that's where the fractional comes in. It's just the only thing that I think of as fractional is it's just a part-time. I'm working for a company one day a week, one day a month, whatever their needs are, and I can work for multiple companies at the same time. So I'm general counsel for a variety of companies all at the same time.
So Rich, and I understand this, but I asked this question so the viewers are clear with this, is that the fractional side allows individuals to have access to you, right? But not at the full cost. So what type of business owners need this type of service? I mean, there's a lot of small business owners. So who needs you?
Well, I think for the most part, everyone needs me, because the legal the legal environment and the legal arena for business has changed over the years, and there's more regulations, there's more laws. I'm located in California. California has human resources or labor laws that change. It seems daily. It's not quite daily, but they change quite often. In fact, I spoke to someone and they said that they could redo a handbook or revise a handbook every 3 months and it would be valid. And there's contract issues. There's intellectual property issues. Some companies have great ideas and they have great brands, but they're not protecting them properly. So I think every company needs me as long as they're in the business world. Some companies, as they start growing and get into the revenue ranges that generate some more legal issues, they need me more than some of the smaller companies.
So what is your geographic, I know you're in California, but what is the geographical restrictions? Can you help companies anywhere?
I can, and I actually have clients across the country. I have clients back on the East Coast. I have clients in the Midwest. You can work anywhere in this day and age with Zoom and working remotely. It's very easy to work with people. And if I need to have someone in a specific state, I have a network of folks that I can rely on and work into the work. And if they need to go to court, for instance, in New York, just say, I have people who can do that.
Okay, because I was going to ask that. I mean, because every state is so complex when it comes to things like HR, right? So how do you keep up to date on some of these compliance issues with all of different rules and regulations?
Well, depending where the client's located, I do the research, or I collaborate with folks in those various states. Whether it's an employment attorney in Minnesota, if I had a client in Minnesota, I would work at that. work with them to get the information and keep up to date. So I keep my hand on the pulse of changes in laws and compliance issues across the country by just collaborating with the folks who practice in those various states.
So when business owners, the general rule that I've heard with businesses is that, look, if you need to hire, like if you're thinking about hiring somebody, you're already too late, right? So what advice do you have for business owners that are questioning whether they need someone like you or not with all of these changes?
Well, that's a really good question. It's something that, I'd like to have a discussion with those business owners just to see where they stand, what issues they know, what issues they're facing. And by bringing someone like me in, they can work on their business and I can work in their business for them. So it's just a matter of communication and having the proper discussion to find out where they are in their business and what issues they're seeing, because they're the boots on the ground. They know what they're seeing. And I can kind of point them in the right direction, what they need from a legal perspective.
So there's a lot of things happening, right? The FTC just came down with their non-competes, which more than likely will get challenged in court. We don't know if that'll hold up. But what are some of the key legal challenges faced by small business owners that they may not be aware of?
Well, I heard a stat a while back that, and this is local to California, but it probably spans the country. A lot of these small businesses are not working off of contracts. They don't have formal contracts. And that's really dangerous, not only for them, but for their business partners. Because if they do get sideways with an issue and they try and go to court or they go to arbitration, the first thing a judge or an arbitrator is going to look for is, where's your contract? And if they don't have a contract, how can someone make a decision based on a handshake or an oral agreement? It's going to be, there's going to be a lot of disputes that way. So that's one area. Again, as I said earlier, human resources is a big area for the legal issues, intellectual property. So there's a lot of different issues that these companies should just, they have to know their business, obviously, but they have to know what legal pitfalls or minefields that they're working in as they move forward with their business and helping it grow.
So let's dig into contracts. I mean, not real deep, but what is a contract? I mean, look, is there a contract between the employer and the employee? Are contracts with vendors? Are you saying all of those contracts?
I would say all those contracts. Some with respect to employer-employee, you may just have an offer letter. It may not be a contract. You can probably usually have your contracts with independent contractors, and that's a whole nother issue we could get in and probably spend a lot of time on.
Yeah.
But also with vendors, partners, people in your supply chain, you have to have a formal contract because you have deadlines that you have to meet. People are relying on you for your business, whether you provide a good for a certain time. That may be a component part. It could be a final good that you have to sell to a distributor or to a third party. So all those contracts need to have the formal agreements between the parties, so everybody knows where they stand. So if they do get sideways, hopefully you can resolve it before litigation, because at the end of the day, litigation can be very costly, time-consuming, and stressful to a small business owner.
And a little bit of a smart aleck tone. So what you're saying is it's important to be very clear on the scope of services.
100%. 100%.
I love that. So clarity is key.
It sure is. And that's another thing with contracts. You want to make sure that the contracts are clear, are explained properly, because that's where you get into litigation. When there's a provision or a term that isn't properly defined or properly understood by both parties, that's where it gets to be a gray area. And, that's where litigation really comes out.
Which is interesting, Rich, because the next question I was going to ask was, what are some of the legal pitfalls you see companies fall into and how can they avoid them? Which I think you just answered, which goes back to, if you identify the scope of services and it's clear in the contract and both parties agree to it, not saying you can avoid litigation, but it reduces the litigation happening. Is that correct?
That is correct. It reduces the chance, or if you get into a dispute, you can probably resolve it before you get into litigation. You can, have a discussion between the parties, whether, the vendor has their own attorney. And if I'm representing a client, we can get on the phone and talk it out and hash it out before it becomes costly and gets into protracted litigation.
So let's dive into the HR side of things, because there are a lot of times that I feel that HR is not part of the overall planning aspect of a business. So they're this island out here that they're just told sometimes what to do. Like, I need go post for this job, and here's the generic job listing. And that's a whole nother conversation in and of itself. Most of them are not versed in legal aspects. So how do you get over the paradigm that you're not there to replace them, you're just there to help them?
Yeah, and I've in my role as a general counsel, and I've been in traditional general counsel. I've always worked with various people, HR and other folks, as I'm here to support you. I'm not here to replace you. You have your job, and I just want to help you do your job better. Make sure that you understand all the potential pitfalls of, like you said, posting a job. Perhaps they post a job like in California, and they post a job and they don't put the salary range, which is now required in California. Things like that. So make sure that they're compliant with their HR issues, so they don't get into trouble. California, we also have a lot of problems with something called a PAGA, which is a private attorney general action that allows someone to, if there's an issue with HR, they can bring almost like a class action without having to jump through all the hurdles of certifying a class. And it can get very costly and be very difficult for a small business owner to deal with something like that.
So an individual can go right to the attorney general and file a class action lawsuit?
It's not with the attorney general. It's a private, it's called a PAGA claim, private attorney general action. It allows them to kind of step into the shoes of the attorney general as an individual.
Wow.
We could spend a lot of time going through that. I don't think it would be useful at this point, but it can be very costly and dangerous to an organization.
And I've talked to other HR professionals and actually employment attorneys. And one of the things that I've heard about with the handbook and working with HR is that sometimes, and I'm not saying to do this, but when it comes down to it, it's better to not have a handbook than to have an outdated handbook. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think you should always have an up-to-date handbook. That's how I answer that question. I think you're running into a lot of problems not having a handbook, because if you do get a disgruntled employee, one of the things that starts out in employment litigation is they ask for certain documents, policies, procedures, and a handbook. And if you say, "Oh, well, we don't have a handbook," that's going to be problematic for you.
Okay. Interesting. And you mentioned earlier in the conversation that those handbooks need to be updated on a regular basis. And with everything changing, how frequently do they need to be updated?
At least annually. That's usually how I've worked with folks who do it. And usually I don't, I may review the handbooks, but I don't do the actual updating them. I'll just review them once they've been updated by the HR department, and work with the HR department and make sure that we're compliant, because that's the whole thing. It's a compliance issue.
Yeah. And it could really destroy a company, like especially a small company. Right?
Absolutely.
Not having some of these things done. And so, Rich, and I want to be cognizant of your time as we wrap up. You mentioned having a network. You mentioned the importance of having that collaborative team. How do you leverage not only your internal network, but leverage other professionals, be it other attorneys or exit planning, financial planning? How do you leverage networks for the benefit of your client?
Yeah, great question. I think as we started the conversation, this is general counsel is not only legal, but there's some strategy involved. So, I try and get to know people in other areas, CPAs, business brokers, things like that. So you understand what they're looking for if one of my clients is looking to sell their business or starting to prepare for a sale 2 or 3 years down the road. So you have to see what the environment is, and just talk to the various people in those various industries, those experts, because as an attorney, you have to rely on other people who do that type of work on a daily basis.
I love it. Rich, any final thoughts as we wrap up?
Well, I think, what we talked about, I think a lot of these small businesses really need to just kind of reflect on what they might need from a legal standpoint. I think they all, as their business grows, it's kind of a minefield out there. And I hate to get back to that analogy, but that's what it is. And, to protect their company and to protect their business, they really should at least explore the idea of having an in-house attorney who's on their side, who can partner with them and be collaborative and strategic in how they're moving forward with their business.
I mean, the reality is that there's a lot of things that we just don't know. We don't know,
Correct.
right?
And until I dig in, I don't know them either.
Right. And I think that's the important part here, is whether it's general counsel, financials, your profit and loss, whatever the case is, there are things that are going to come up that you just can't plan for. And you need a team there to help you navigate some of these things. And more importantly, you need a team that works together, right, Rich? I mean, it's you need to have all these pieces to make sure that you're not, putting your company at risk.
100%. When I've always worked, I don't work on an island. I work with the CFO, the chief sales officer, the chief marketing officer, all the people, chief operations officer. I work with all the different. It's a cohesive team that works together.
I think that's a great point to end on. Rich, thank you so much. I appreciate your time. If you have any questions, you guys, please leave them in the comments. Make sure to hit that subscribe button. Rich's website is down below. If you need an introduction, please reach out to us. We'd be happy to do so. Rich, thank you so much for your time.
Mike, thanks for having me again.